Good night and welcome to another edition of In Touch. I trust that you had a safe and restful weekend and that you and your families, you were safe and very well protected from the rains. Tonight we have another interesting and exciting discussion for you. As always, we bring you individuals who would be able to share with you, empower you, and give you information so that you can go back into your communities, into your workplace, and into your various discussion halls to add to the discussions that would happen on matters related to St. Lucia, to the region, and in fact the world. I'm very pleased tonight that I have in studio with me Dr. Didacus Jules. He's a registrar, former Registrar and Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Examinations Council, our current Director General of the Oecs, very well known in St. Lucia, a son of the soil, very well known in the region as well. And this is why I am extremely pleased that we are streaming live on Carry FM tonight. And so Dominica is in touch with St. Lucia, and they, of course, are welcome to participate in our discussion later on. Call someone, let them know that In Touch is on. We are streaming live on www.choice39.tv, and we are also streaming live on www.kairifm, that is KAIRIFM.com. Dr. Jules, welcome to In Touch. We have been meaning to have this discussion for some time, but you are a very busy man.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gigi. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm excited that you are here with us tonight. There's a lot that we can discuss, but I will start by asking you, do you miss the CXC? Do you miss your former home, your former job?
In some respects, I do. Education has always been my passion, and we were poised at CXC to take off with some very interesting initiatives that would take Caribbean education into the 21st century. The part of it that I don't miss is the element of frustration, because I think all of the changes we made at CXC in the last 7 years have been very strategic, but the level of buy-in from ministries of education across the region was not as enthusiastic as we expected it to be.
I'm sure there are persons who are listening to you and they are saying, well, you'll be faced with the very same frustration where you are as Director General of the OECS, because we have seen for some time now you have a number of discussions taking place at that level. We want to run in a particular direction, but the pace of implementation at the various countries or at different levels does not always seem to be the same. And it takes me right to one of our key areas, which would be the freedom of movement of people in the region. So it seems as if you are moving from frustration to frustration. Do you get that sense?
No, not really. I think I move from challenge to challenge. Because the frustration is the downside of it, where you do feel that things could move faster. I'm one of those people who looks at things not in terms of the progress that has been achieved. Like, for example, a lot of people have claimed that CXC has moved forward a great deal, but I don't measure progress by how far we've come. I measure it in relation to where we should be going in relation to the competition that we face. There is a very dangerous sense of complacency in just looking at how hard you're running in a race and not looking at how the other runners, how much faster the other runners are going. Because even if you're at your peak performance and you believe that you're running in top form, and the rest of the race is going faster, you're actually falling behind.
Makes a lot of sense.
And the other thing too is that I believe that every challenge, every problem, every setback is an opportunity. We just have to analyze it deeply enough, and we will find ways of overcoming that hurdle or that obstacle that would catapult us, leapfrog us to a place that we would not have been had that problem not occurred.
I think
so in that sense,
sure.
you know, the movement to OECS was a timely transition for me, because I think I have done all what I could have done at CXC to take it to that next level. And the bottlenecks that I saw were not educational bottlenecks. They had to do with wider policy. How do we make education work so that our agriculture can be transformed? How do we use education in order to transform our lifestyles, our health systems, the futures that we build? And that can only be changed by the kind of opportunity that this job allows me to use.
I'm sure that in your new position, the CXC will be looking to you for a lot of support. Having walked that road and knowing some of the challenges, do you think that there is anything that you can do in your current role as the Director General of the OECS to map out a path, or at least to place it on that path of extreme importance for the local governments?
Well, I have already started doing that. I think I will continue to be CXC's most vociferous ambassador. And not because of just loyalty to the old job, but because of my absolute conviction of the transformative possibilities of education. We just held a couple of weeks ago an OECS Ministers of Education meeting, and I used the opportunity to paint a picture which I had done to the heads of government in St. Vincent of the crisis in education in the Caribbean and what we need to do to overcome it. As difficult as some of the challenges are, I think we have huge opportunities to make our children succeed. And success in education is not rocket science. All of our governments are spending far greater sums of money than even the developed countries like Japan, Germany, per capita or as a percentage of government expenditure on education. But we are not seeing the commensurate returns. So I don't think it is a matter of requiring governments to spend more money. It is working more intelligently and ensuring that the right policies are put in place that will empower and enable teachers and students to teach and to learn.
Excellent. I want to move to your current position as Director General of the OECS. You took up this appointment somewhere around the 1st of May.
1st of May, International Workers' Day.
Oh, wow. And so that coincided with your appointment. So I think it tells you what your tenure would be like. You will be working every single day of that period.
No, I don't think so. I think what it signifies is what my commitment is, International Workers' Day.
Indeed, indeed. You are coming in at a very critical time. I think you would have an opportunity to listen to some of the comments as to what the people of the region think about OECS. This is not to comfort you in any way, but I'm of the view that because of the progress we have made at that level, many persons seem to have more faith in OECS as a unit as opposed to the greater body of CARICOM. In fact, you would hear people make comments such as, we need to put all of our energy into developing OECS and just forget about the rest because we are not making that kind of progress and we do not feel that we have equal rights in the greater bodies as we do in the OECS. What do you think your greatest challenge will be in your current position as it relates to getting the people to really understand the role of the OECS and to buy into the responsibility that the OECS has to develop in the region?
Okay, first of all, with respect to your comments about OECS versus CARICOM, I think we need to be, there's a lot of frustration, frankly, about the regional integration movement, more so on CARICOM than on OECS, but there is also a measure of frustration with the OECS. But let's be abundantly clear that regional integration cannot succeed ultimately. OECS integration cannot succeed if CARICOM does not succeed. And CARICOM cannot succeed if OECS does not succeed. So we have to stop seeing it as a zero-sum game. It's not a question of dropping. There are necessary battles we have to fight, and that is part of the dynamic of the Caribbean's history and its trajectory. Bigger islands, smaller islands,
yes,
inter-island rivalries. That is part of the process of us learning to respect each other, to give voice to everyone regardless of size. Some of the big countries have to drop the conceit that they have nothing to learn from the smaller countries. Some of the small countries have to get past the complex that we're small and therefore we're insignificant, and recognize that we are as powerful as we feel inside and that we have something to show. And I think my role is to, yes, fight the battles, and as you know, people who know me know that I speak very frankly in many respects. In some ways I'm really not suited for the true role of a diplomat because I believe you need to, no, you need to speak very straightforwardly to call a spade, yes, especially if you want to make progress. We cannot make progress by double speak and pretending to clothe things in acceptable language when sometimes what is required is straight talk. So There are tremendous possibilities, but for me the biggest challenge really is to ensure the restoration of the people in the process of regional integration. The irony of that regional integration process, if you look at what has been happening over the last 20, 30 years, well, even before that, if you go back to as early as the days of pre-Columbian times, Caribbean people move freely. The Caribs and Arawaks, they moved in their canoes. There's always been a natural impulse, not just in the Caribbean, but all over the world. People, the idea of freedom has no boundaries and limits. It does not accept geographic boundaries. It does not accept state boundaries, political boundaries, whatever. Freedom is an unlimited idea, right? And people have moved freely across. When the state emerged, it started setting those parameters on freedom of movement and so on, ironically, while seeking to cast itself as an expression of freedom. So we have set up all of the barriers to regional integration were not set up by the people of the region, they were set up by states. In fact, Derek Walcott in his collection of poems, in one of his poems says that, and there's a line that in which he talks about the demise of the Federation, and he says, and then every island broke into a nation, every rock broke into a nation. So we have created these barriers, and now the whole process of regional integration is to dismantle those barriers that we have set up. So it's kind of ironic, and it's like the task of Sisyphus. You know, you roll a rock up a hill to let it roll back down, to roll it back up again. So I think the best guarantee and the biggest challenge is how do we ensure that the people of the region, whether it be the Oecs or the Caribbean, have a more decisive voice in the regional integration process, that the process becomes a vehicle that gives voice to their aspirations, so that what people wish can in fact happen. And I think that, you know, one of my greatest moments of pride and faith in the Caribbean was around the time of World Cup cricket, when you just moved into a country, they put a band around your arm, your wrist, and you could travel across the Caribbean, just walk off a flight like you drop off a bus from Castries to Villefort. But it ended
as quickly as cricket.
Because of the sunset legislation, and foolishly I said to myself that given that experience, we could never return to the status quo ante, and we did with a vengeance.
Yes.
So one of the things we are looking at, thankfully in terms of the Oecs, we have now with the finalization of the arrangements for St. Lucia and Antigua, we now have full freedom.
Finally.
Any Oecs person has a stamp traveling, has a stamp in their passport, indefinite stay. You can stay, work, live, play as long as you want. I think my historical challenge is to try to accelerate the day when at any street corner you stop any citizen of the Oecs and ask them about regional integration, and they can tell you, yes, it is necessary, it is working, and they can identify the benefits to them or their families or their communities arising from regional integration.
Whereas
and there are a lot of ideas that we have in terms of how this can be done easily, more cost effectively.
Indeed.
It's not rocket science.
Yes, and there are so many ideas. If you speak to people and you just ask them, what do you think about the Oecs? What do you think of CARICOM? You hear so many different thoughts and ideas that we can buy into and we can implement. But there seems to be a barrier. Even as we have moved to formalize and to have the two remaining countries, St. Lucia and Antigua, have finally made the changes necessary to the legislation, and we now have freedom of movement of people within the Oecs. You still get the feeling that we are very territorial and we guard jealously our borders. We understand that the legislation has made provisions for certain things. We understand too that you know, the government, the prime ministers and so on have collectively decided that this is the way to go. But there are some citizens who are very, very cautious, and for one reason or the other does not believe that this is the right way to go. What would you say to these individuals that St. Lucia now belongs to, or has always been, not just St. Lucia, but St. Vincent, Grenada, and so on?
Well, I think within that point of view, there are nuances. There are some people who have that view because of genuine ignorance. They've never traveled, so they just know St. Lucia, and therefore St. Lucia is the center of the known universe for them. So they fear anything outside, and more importantly, they fear people from outside coming in. Yes. And by the way, that's not unique to St. Lucians. I mean, a really big lesson in that whole experience, if you follow the politics of the United States with the resurgence of the right in the US, it's all about territorialism and people, you know, the whole treatment of migrants and all of that speaks to that fear. There's a fear of the other, the person who's different, the person who looks different, who talks different. People fear those things. The more educated, and that's why I believe so much, as I said earlier, in the transformative power of education. The more you believe, the more educated you are. And I'm not talking about education in terms of academic degrees and so on, right? In terms of certification. But the more educated you are, the more you lose prejudice, right? Because you get a better understanding of other people. You know how to relate to other people. You have a higher degree of emotional intelligence. And so you understand that. But within that grouping of persons, so there are people genuine ignorance. There are persons who maintain those positions because they have interest to protect. So they are big fish in a small pond, and they fear, you know, if Barbadians were to be allowed to come in here to set up business, then they're going to lose their position of privilege, because they have not shown the level of entrepreneurship and inventiveness that others who come in might undertake. And we see that happening all the time. And again, it's not unique to St. Lucia or the Oecs, it's a universal phenomenon. So the key to that is education. And I think I've been having some discussions at the Oecs with, you know, persons, different groupings and so on. And I've actually received and asked for ideas from some university students, young people in the region, to send me ideas on how could we make the Oecs more relevant to them. And I've gotten some very powerful ideas. One of the most consistent thing coming back to me is that young people need more of a voice. Yes. And so we have to create a forum. And of course, the technology today gives us huge opportunities to create voice at literally zero cost, to enable the voices of young people to be heard, to articulate themselves and so on. And that's why, for example, at the Oecs Ministers of Education meeting that was held 2 weeks ago, instead of having a feature addressed by some guru on education, we had a video called Voices of Students of the Oecs, who spoke to what their expectations and their aspirations are for education. And we had a live address by a young St. Lucian girl, Ms. Verdant, who spoke to the ministers and very frankly and openly to ministers about what's wrong with education and what she would like to see corrected.
Excellent. Nice, new, innovative ways of encouraging the participation of young people in the discussion. And
not only young people, but I think, as I said, in ensuring the inclusion of people, the people of the Oecs in the integration process, means that you move the process away from being a bureaucratic, treaty, legalistic thing to being something that comes alive for people. And the only way it can come alive for people is if people at every level of the society can see opportunity. Martinique, for example, just voted, the regional council voted to join the Oecs. So effectively, as of 2 weeks ago, Martinique is a member. We've not signed formally, but we're treating them as a full member, as an associate member. And already we're seeing tremendous opportunities. You see, you have to take the seeds of what exists and to really fertilize that to become the kind of tree that you can reap real fruit from in the future. There's a very heavy flow of visitors from Martinique on holiday weekends and so on. You saw the beach festival they had some time ago and so on.
And then I understand that we've been used as a transshipment point too, because they come in transit to the US and so on, because some of the flights are cheaper through St. Lucia.
Exactly. There's a lot of things cheaper. I mean, they buy out all the lambe in Gozile and so on. So the challenge here is, how do we, with this influx of Martinican tourists, and now that Martinique is part of the Oecs, that movement of people should be easier. So can we encourage a form of, not just the individuals coming across and groups coming across, but actually cultivate a distinct channel of tourism with Martinican visitors coming not just to St. Lucia, but moving across the Oecs.
Yes.
And because these people are regular folk just looking to have a good time and wanting to embed themselves and experience the life of the Anglophone Oecs, can we do a form of community tourism so that a Martinican visitor can come spend a weekend at your home and pay 30, 40 US bed and breakfast. They move around with your family, they line with them. It builds people-to-people links.
Yes.
Right? It creates a tourism economy, a parallel tourism economy that reaches to the ordinary person.
Community
right?
tourism.
And it engages people. So tourism now becomes not just another form of economy, but another medium for building people-to-people understanding. And it is in that people-to-people understanding that all of the prejudices will be eroded.
Indeed. You're viewing In Touch live on Choice TV, and you're also listening to us on Carry FM. We're due for our first commercial break. When we come back, we'll be continuing our discussion with Dr. Didacus Jules, Director General of the Oecs. Welcome back to In Touch. I'm your host, Jadia Japie-Emmanuel. My guest tonight is Dr. Didacus Jules, and he is the Director General of the Oecs. A wide range of issues to cover tonight. We spoke a little while ago about how people view Oecs, and also we spoke to the issue of freedom of movement of people. Dr. Jules, the freedom of movement of goods and services within that economic space, we have not reached as far as we have in terms of the freedom of movement of people. And interestingly, a while ago you spoke to some issues that are associated with the freedom of movement of people that I know that are also associated with the freedom of movement of freedom of trade between within the Oecs, and that is businesses and freedom to move, and this person would be able to bring their goods in freely without tariffs and so on. Where are we so far at this point with the freedom of movement, freedom of trade, and what are some of the barriers? What do you think would be required for us to move speedily into a full economic union within that space?
Okay, let me first of all say that there are three strategic priorities I've set myself for my tenure at Oecs. And one of them is consolidating the architecture of regional integration, which is not just the Oecs Commission or Secretariat, but the Supreme Court, ECTEL, working seamlessly and more coherently, realizing economies of scale of operation and so on, so that the cost of providing regional service is lowered and cheaper to the governments and self-sustaining as much as possible. The second one is facilitating the free movement of people, goods, services, capital, and ideas.
Capital and ideas.
And ideas, yeah.
I like that.
Now, of all of these, the most, in my view, the most fundamental ones are the freedom of movement of people and the freedom of movement of ideas, right? But with the freedom of movement of people, all the other freedoms of movement will be, what's the word I'm looking for? Will be enhanced. The demand for that will enhance, because the more people travel,
yes,
the more the trade, the freedom or the need for freedom of trade will increase.
Agreed.
As well as the need for the provision of services. And with the freedom of movement of people, the transfer of ideas, the cross-fertilization of ideas and so on will happen. So we are going very systematically through this process.
Yes.
So we've secured now, as of now, the freedom of movement is assured, right? There are still some impediments to that. One of the major impediments is LIAT. I know LIAT gets a lot of knocking, but we have to also recognize the importance of what we have. LIAT is ours, and we have to fix it. We have to make travel easier and cheaper for people.
At all costs? Any cost?
Not at any cost. I said cheaper for people.
Yes, but in order for it to be cheaper for people, there would have to be some kind of investment or movement or overhaul within LIAT itself.
Definitely.
And everyone seemed to be backing away from dealing with that big elephant.
Yeah, no, that's not quite true, because, for example, we just signed 2 months ago a collaboration agreement with the government of Mexico. And one of the things that the Mexican foreign minister said to me is that, based on requests made by the OECS prime ministers, Mexico has already done the research on how they can assist LIAT by way of augmenting their lift capacity, what sort of aircraft that the Mexicans can assist in procuring to help strengthen the LIAT fleet, what kinds of inter-airline arrangements can be made, how can they boost travel between the Caribbean and Latin and Central America, and what sort of expertise might be required to assist LIAT to get its act together. So, I mean, the LIAT board and persons have been struggling to fix it, but it's not up to any single actor to achieve that resolution. The board by itself can't fix it. There's a question of the high level of taxation on the tickets. That has to be addressed by governments. In fact, one of the things we want to do in the OECS Secretariat is to do, and that's where the technical expertise becomes important, do an econometric study to show governments what would be the impact of the lowering of taxation on airline tickets. Because let's be realistic and fair. You can't just ask governments to remove taxation, which would reduce their revenues in a very difficult time, without the assurance that it's not going to affect other areas of their operation. So we are, hypothetically, we believe that to the extent that you drop taxation, you make, or not just drop taxation, to the extent you make air travel cheaper, you make it possible for more people to fly more frequently. Now, what we need to work out mathematically, and then maybe through
how low can you go?
A pilot period, not just how low can you go, but to prove that hypothesis, right?
Do you think a single tax within a defined space, like the OECS, for example, do you think that would be an option, that would be a way to go, as opposed to having each government see at what level they would be able to
all of that would be part of the thing. We have to show governments where differential taxes, if you operate a differential tax regime, and some governments are willing to put themselves on a zero tax base, for example, for air travel, you are going to really disadvantage yourself, because the jurisdictions that have high tax associated with travel will see diminishing numbers of visitors versus those that have ease of travel at much cheaper prices. So there are a lot of things that need to be worked out, but
indeed.
You know, we are on the road to working these out. With respect to the goods, freedom of movement of goods, as I said, what we are doing is very methodically and systematically. So we've dealt with freedom of movement of people, people are happy where we are, but we're not quite there yet, because we have to solve the transportation. Freedom of movement requires a means of transport. The OECS governments at the last authority meeting asked us to explore the options for a regional ferry service. Now, already there are ferry services in operation on specific routes. We have been trying to get people to cooperate, the private sector. For example, with shipping, I discovered that preceded my tenure, my assumption of the position, that the OECS had secured through Compete Caribbean $600,000 US to assist with the rationalization of shipping within the OECS. So all those little persons who own boats, who've been plying the waters and so on, the idea was to encourage them to form an association and get them to set up their own routing. So they decide, okay, how are we going to do it? If you have 2 boats, I have 1 boat. How do we organize this thing? So we work together to have regular scheduled visits at different ports, and we can, by working together, we can grow the shipping market and control the market. These are indigenous owners.
Did we get anywhere?
Well, the long and short of the story is that we lost the $600,000 because they formed an association, and the association never functioned. We were called by Compete Caribbean saying we were in danger of losing that money. We tried very hard to get in touch with the people to tell them, look, you've got to get this going. because these are private sector initiatives. Now, people sometimes get upset when governments get involved in the private sector, but if the private sector is given opportunities on a platter and they're not making use of it, governments have to respond to needs of society and economy.
Indeed.
So, unfortunately, we lost that, right? We're making yet another attempt to get things going, and hopefully we can get that going. But the idea, though, is to ensure that we have some kind of ferry service going that's reliable, that's cost effective, that's also fuel efficient, because a major cost in the operation of a ferry is the cost of fuel, so that we can have this going. Now, with respect to the wider freedom of movement of goods, we have already done, we have been doing a lot of systematic work to dismantle all the customs and other regimes that affect this ease of movement. Because if you run a business, let's say you are a dealer for a particular brand of cars, and you bring your car, your headquarters is in Dominica, you bring your cars into Dominica, and you want to ship to Montserrat, to Antigua, to BVI, to St. Lucia. Every shipment from Dominica should not incur additional taxes, because we are supposed to be a single economic space.
Yes.
So when you bring your goods in, whatever taxation you pay, it's at point of entry. And then the flow of goods should be like you moving a bundle of goods from Castries to Vieux-Fort. Nobody stops you, nobody taxes you. So we've had support from Compete Caribbean on this. And we have also done missions to all member states, explaining the whole regime and what it involves and how we're going to go about it, because we need to very systematically involve the stakeholders. And I think, if anything, that has been one of the reasons for the successes that the OECS has done to date, has achieved to date. Because no initiative is just conceived of at the MON and implemented by technocrats at the MON. We always work with virtual teams of people, like when we're doing the freedom of movement of goods, like with people, for example. At some point, all immigration officers in each country, there were workshops with them, discussions, explanations, received criticisms, feedback, so the regime was modified to take into account the problems that they saw in implementation. And it's very important. The most important virtue or attribute required for regional integration to succeed is for the persons driving this to listen to the voices of stakeholders, their concerns, their aspirations, their fears, and their suggestions. Because by doing that, we save ourselves a whole lot of pain, we get more buy-in to the process, and people become more enthusiastic about implementation.
Is there any concern that with the freedom of movement of goods that countries would have to give up, or I don't want to use the word lose, because we're dealing with a single economic space, but to give up some of the taxes? Our revenue, if you look at how government's revenue is generated, a lot of revenue is generated at the ports, the taxes that you pay to bring goods in and so on. Now, as it currently exists, if you bring in a vehicle in from Japan and you take it to Dominica, you work in Dominica for 5 years, you are coming back to St. Lucia to work. Many persons have argued that I should not be paying additional taxes to move this vehicle from Dominica to St. Lucia, which is what we want to achieve with the freedom of movement of goods. However, the country in itself, at least in the first instance, would be realizing a loss on revenue if you move into that full freedom of movement of goods and services. How would we buffer or get the leaders or even the members of the country itself, the citizens, to accept that while in the first instance you'll be giving up this, if you look at the larger picture, or we are hoping that once you have that agreement right across the region, then it will not be as detrimental to our economy?
Yeah. Well, I think the citizens are there already. People are more than ready for that type of regime to be in place. It's really, and I believe in many respects the leaders are there because they were the ones who signed the revised Treaty of Bastille. So they have, given the mandate for this to happen. Ironically, sometimes the biggest challenge is at the level of technocrats, the middle levels of the public service, people wanting to preserve their turf, their jurisdictions, exercise their control. You know, there are a lot of little fiefdoms embedded all over the place that will have to be fractured for this to happen.
Some people would not like to hear that. But like you said a little while ago, you have to be honest and very frank in your discussion. We're due for a second commercial break. When we come back, we'll be continuing our discussion, and we'll be also opening the phone lines to get your calls, your questions, and your views. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to In Touch. You are listening to us live on Kyrie FM and also viewing us live on Choice39.tv. My guest this evening is Dr. Didacus Jules. We have spoken on a wide range of issues, but I want to focus now on the Oecs response to Ebola. A lot has been said about Ebola. I'm sure you have been following the discussion, you have been following the debate. There is a lot of panic. Many persons are asking questions as to how we will deal with any potential threat. You indicated very early that because of our vulnerabilities, our size, our resources, that there has to be a regional response, a collaborative response to Ebola. From very early, in fact, the Oecs was the first body within the region to respond, and you may have placed some of our other bodies in a very precarious position, because I heard our Prime Minister, for example, lamenting how tardy CARICOM was in responding to the call. What is happening on the Oecs level? I know that you addressed the House of Assembly, but even as we have had no discussion since then, I'm sure that there is a lot happening behind the scenes to continue to prepare and to consolidate our resources just in case.
Well, first of all, remember I gave you the analogy of the race and how fast the race is moving. I'm really not concerned about who's doing or who's not doing. The fact of the matter is Ebola is a present, looming possibility, and we have to react to it. So is chikungunya. Well, it's a present reality that we have to contend with.
Yes.
So we convened and actually established, there have been meetings of ministers of health of the Oecs before.
Yes.
But we actually activated the revised Treaty of Basel and created a Council of Ministers of Health in the Oecs, because we talked a while ago about all this freedom of movement of goods, capital, people, ideas. Well, even before that freedom of movement of all of these things, there's the freedom of movement of disease. Yes. Right? Disease has no borders, it requires no visas. No visas whatsoever. So we have to accelerate our forms of protection, our circle of protection in the region, to protect ourselves, to guard ourselves against infectious diseases. And that requires a number of things being done. It requires that we change our habits of sanitation, because I'm sure if you recall carefully what the scenes you've seen on TV of the situation in Africa, you must have noticed the poor sanitation conditions, right? That is a formula for all kinds of infectious diseases to multiply. So if not Ebola, something else is going to come in the future. I see this Ebola crisis as a great opportunity for us to rise to the challenge, to protect ourselves, but in the process to completely transform our systems of public health, to move them from being curative to preventative, to change our whole approach to public sanitation and healthcare. And that has to happen. This is not a responsibility of governments alone, right? I think governments need to now put in place some serious measures that are going to literally force our populations, our people, all of us, to change the way we do things. I have seen people urinating publicly all over the capitals of the Oecs,
Sadly, yes.
Right? And that needs to stop. The littering. I remember when Romanus Lancico set up the police Zodi in St. Lucia, people ridiculed the idea. But it did have an impact on improving the sanitation in the tourist areas and in the city of Castries. So we do need to take some serious measures on this. Sorry. So yeah, that's in terms of the OECS response, though, we have done a number of things. We convened as Ministers of Health almost a month ago.
Yes.
We invited the CARICOM Agency for Health, CAFRA, to participate. The PAHO people were present. We had chikungunya and Ebola on the agenda, together with some other things. But the main focus of the meeting was on these two diseases.
But where have we gone since then? Prime Minister Senusha made a suggestion that as opposed to every member state having a complete facility, that perhaps we should see how we can combine our resources and have a single facility dedicated to treating.
Yeah, but what Prime Minister Anthony suggested is a little more sophisticated than that. I think that's a bit of a misrepresentation. Let me just explain to you what has happened since. So from the Ministers of Health meeting, we agreed that the OECS is going to work together to address the Ebola question, and that there were two dimensions. So there was a regional dimension and a national dimension. The locus of responsibility is at the national level, because every country has to have its act together, bring all the stakeholders together and so on. However, the plan for moving forward has to be a common template, and that's where the OECS comes into play, so that we are using common protocols consistent with the international requirements, but suited to our conditions and our capabilities. And where we have gaps, the role of the OECS is to resourcing, getting assistance, material and other forms, technical assistance, in order to plug those gaps. So from immediately, I think with less than a week after our Ministers of Health meeting, the ALBA countries called a meeting, spearheaded by Cuba and Venezuela, to address the Ebola question. It was a summit for heads. All of the OECS members who are members of ALBA were represented by their prime ministers, with the exception of Dominica, because they are in the election mode. So one of the ministers from Dominica, the Minister of Health, attended. And again, this was one of, I've been to hundreds literally of international meetings in my lifetime, and this was one of the most precise meetings I have attended, because the research was done beforehand. The meeting was a one-day meeting, and an incredible amount of work was accomplished in that one day. Half day was speeches by the heads of state, talking about their needs, the main parameters of where they want to go with this Ebola thing. And the second part of the day was visits to the training centers and institutes addressing the Ebola question in Cuba. Right? Prime Minister, the coming out of that was a declaration of 21 points. And that 21-point declaration was not fluffy declarations, it were precise measures that the countries were committing themselves to in order to address the Ebola question collectively. Within 4 days of that meeting of heads, the Cubans convened a technical meeting of planners to address the Ebola question, so that all the countries could start preparing their plans, come up to Cuba, share the plans, have them critiqued and addressed. Now understand that in all of the countries of the world, Cuba has the best capability, because they have the largest number of doctors and so on from any country on the ground fighting Ebola face to face. So they understand the disease, they know what has happened, and you will note that not a single Cuban has died from Ebola as yet. So that meeting was held within 4 days. Within I guess about a week and a half subsequently, CARICOM called the meeting, which we attended, and again the commitment there was to converge the OECS effort with a CARICOM effort, not to shut down our effort, but to converge it with CARICOM, and to ensure that the Cubans play a critical role alongside PAHO and WHO in helping us address the issue. Yet on the weekend, on Saturday, about approximately 30 persons from 10 OECS countries were sent to Cuba. This time doctors and frontline medical caregivers who would have to actually undertake the clinical management of the disease. And they are going to be in Cuba for this week, receiving training at the Institute for Tropical Disease Control in the actual management of Ebola cases. So that's what has been happening in terms of capacity building. In the meantime, at the Oecs Commission, we have been undertaking certain diplomatic initiatives. We made a request to Cuba, as I said in Parliament, to provide us with a rapid response team.
Yes.
That team is being configured as we speak. We hope in a matter of days the team will be in the Caribbean, in the Oecs. The government of Antigua and Barbuda has agreed to provide housing, accommodation and transportation to that team. The reason we're putting them in Antigua, because that's the base for LIAT, because LIAT is a partner with us in that Ebola fight.
Yes.
LIAT provided free tickets to get all of the persons who went to Cuba to date to meet to Trinidad or St. Martin in order to catch the Copa flights. We paid from the Oecs, we paid for the tickets from Trinidad and St. Martin to Havana. Right? The governments met the rest of the costs. So it has been a real partnership.
Right.
And we're hoping that LIAT will continue to be a partner in this journey. So we have done this training, and at the Oecs we requested the rapid response team from the Cubans. We've also requested an expert in the management of campaigns on infectious diseases to be located at the commission, because we are now using this to constitute a health desk. Dr. James and Catherine, who actually his terms of reference is to deal with HIV, and he's handled that very successfully at the Secretariat, is now effectively serving as the head of health at the Oecs. So he's coordinated. Last week we had our first follow-up to the Ministers of Health meeting.
Okay.
Every week we have a 1.5-hour telephone conference, video conference call with Ministers of Health, Chief Medical Officers, Permanent Secretaries of Health, and whoever is the Ebola focal point, and anybody else the Minister wants to participate in that meeting. And the meeting is video conferencing. We're using a technology that is free, but which allows anybody who has to be part of that call to call in, whether from a fixed line, your cell phone, from a video facility, wherever. We can all call in. And we had very few problems with the transmission dimension of this. But again, the purpose of that meeting is to coordinate efforts. Where are we at? Who needs what assistance? Share expertise, share ideas. Begin that process of regular collaboration and convergence.
So we spoke about capacity, we spoke about resources, and I know many persons are asking, well, what about the facility?
No, well, I was coming to that,
yeah,
because
sure.
I just described the assistance we've requested of the Cubans.
Yes.
We have approached a number of other countries. Like I met with the Russian ambassador last week, and what we asked him for was 10,000 personal protection kits for the Oecs. There are 10 countries. The idea is to give each country 1,000 kits. Now understand, according to the PAHO guidelines, the personal protection kits you see the people wearing, the white suits, like space suits, cost $1,500 US each. Now these suits have to be disposable. And my understanding is, I'm not a medical doctor, but my understanding from the medical people is that you would have to use one of these not more than 4 hours at a time. So if you're treating an Ebola patient, we're talking a doctor would have to do 2 shifts in that, 2 suits per shift, right?
And then you're
so
dealing
it
with
means,
a team.
and then you're talking about burning and securely disposing of that immediately after use. And if you're talking about a team, you do the mathematics and multiply it by 1,500 US and multiply that by 2.7 EC, and you see the danger that, the peril that we face. Is that Ebola, if it hits us, would literally mean that we're burning dollars, right?
Yes. In fact, last week, I thought it was free. I was under the mistaken impression that
it's not free.
we were being
it's not free.
given the
no,
equipment.
It's not free. You see, what people have to realize too, every crisis of this nature is a cash cow for drug companies, for, companies that produce supplies and so on.
So
and in fact, what the Cubans have said in the last meeting that was held in Havana is that they are offering to produce, they are producing some of those suits for their own use in Africa at significantly less cost than this, and they are offering to do that. Now, the pharmaceutical procurement program at the OECS that provides drugs to the OECS at 30% cheaper than off-the-shelf prices has already started a search for the best prices, the best products, the best quality. So for common procurement, so rather than individual countries buying, some countries have purchased because, I mean, they have to act immediately.
And some agencies as
well.
well.
And some agencies. But the point is we want to do a central procurement so that the economies of scale can kick in. And again, it would mean we would have a stock that we can flow to countries as the need requires. So we've requested that. We've also requested huge quantities of decontamination fluid, so that because the decontamination is the key thing.
Yes.
I don't know if you saw on the news, there was an African nurse, a trainee nurse, who treated 5 members of her family, and 4 of them pulled through, 1 died.
Yes.
She used garbage bags for her protection. Now, I'm not suggesting, let's be clear, because people are quick to take things out of context. I'm not suggesting that garbage bags can protect us, but the fact is that happened in Africa.
Yes.
The lesson out of this and the moral of the story is that while the gear is important, the process of decontamination and the attentiveness that you pay to your personal security in the process of treating patients is vital.
Extremely.
And that is why the Cuban Rapid Response Team, when they come to the region, the first thing we want them to do is to move from country to country, training people, the frontline caregivers, in protocols of behavior and protocols of personal protection so that they don't get affected by the disease. I think the most important thing here is the battle against fear, and the presence of the Cubans are going to be important, because no matter how well trained people are, I anticipate if a case appears anywhere in the region, people are going to freak out.
Yes.
And so the presence of the Cubans would help stabilize the situation. They know what to do. They faced it before. They will work alongside our people to address the question. We have also made requests from a number of countries to assist us with portable and field isolation units. And what you need to understand, some countries have identified sites, but notwithstanding that, we want to have movable, portable isolation units. So wherever an outbreak occurs, you can think. And both PAHO and the Cubans have a common design of how that facility should be organized. Essentially, it's like a maze, but you can only go in one direction. You can't turn back. So and it's all segmented according to the stages of treatment.
Okay.
So progressively, as you move forward to that, you can't, for example, come out of a decontamination center and re-enter into the infected part of the facility. That is very important. So we're trying to get those facilities in place to have them available, at least one for each member state. Now, the OECS ring of protection is 10 countries. It's the 9 OECS countries from the British Virgin Islands in the north to St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the southernmost part. But we have also included Guadeloupe and Martinique, because Martinique is now a member of the OECS and Guadeloupe is on the way to membership. Because this disease has no borders, we figured the best thing to do is to secure the geographic archipelago that embraces the OECS. The only weak point left out in that is St. Martin, and we have been trying to engage St. Martin on how they can participate in this effort.
Indeed. When you spoke a little while ago about the meetings between the ministers...
Before you go on, let me pick up on the question of Prime Minister Anthony's point about the facility.
Facility.
Yeah. Prime Minister Anthony's point was not that governments would not create their own facilities. It was simply that governments would create facilities to deal with in isolated cases as they occur. But his fear was, and that is important because all of our planning has been predicated on scenario planning. So we're looking at different scenarios. What if this? What if that? If that, then what? Right? What he was saying was that if we have a couple cases, we can deal with it. The response team will assist us. We handle it locally. But what if we have a cruise ship come into the harbor, or an airplane with 250 passengers, and one of those persons, let's say a transatlantic flight, 8 hours in flight, one person, two persons may show symptoms of Ebola, you're going to have to quarantine all these people. Do we have the capacity to deal with that? Can we manage that? So the thinking here is there should be some, can we find a way of ensuring that there is a facility somewhere that has that capacity for what effectively is a worst case scenario, in which you can divert those patients for treatment with the proper isolation and all of the quarantine requirements and so on, and contain the disease from reaching to the wider society.
And once we have in that discussion, we would have to speak to the issue of transportation too.
Yeah, well, yeah. So there are a lot of complexities in this thing, and you see people are saying, well, no planning. There's a lot of planning happening.
I can tell.
But this cannot happen overnight. It cannot happen overnight.
Yes.
You know, and what is very important too is that we in the OECS have undertaken to also brief the parliamentary opposition on those questions. Now, in a way, St. Lucia jumped ahead because the meeting in Parliament made it not necessary for us to, as OECS, convene. But there are other countries where that needs to happen, and we've suggested to the other OECS countries that they probably need to look at what St. Lucia has done, because perhaps the easiest way to do that in a manner that allows you an in-depth look at what each country's plans are that are consistent with the regional plan is to do it as St. Lucia did, a meeting of Parliament. So Dr. St. Catherine and I have indicated our availability to go to any Parliament that requires to present.
Are there any plans to convene the OECS Assembly so that there can be a discussion at that level? Yes, the OECS Assembly, whenever the OECS Assembly is convened, that will be part of the discussion. We'll place a telephone number on the screen right now so that you can call in with your suggestions, your comments. The number is 452-7347. Feel free to call in to do so now. When you spoke a little while ago about the meetings and the fact that the ministers have been meeting and of course those involved in the planning have been meeting via video conference and so on, I could not help but think of the big news right now, and that is with Cable and Wireless acquiring Columbus. Many St. Lucians are not too happy with that move. Many persons are saying that it is taking away my freedom to choose. And I left Lime because I was dissatisfied with something and went to the competitor. And now I basically have found myself the very same place that I tried to run away from. But we have a call. No, we've lost that call. So your comments, your own thoughts on the acquisition?
Well, I have appointed someone as strategic advisor on ICT to the OECS. Let me make it clear, at no cost to the OECS. The guy is a Trinidadian called Beville Wooden, who's part of the governing body of ICANN, which is the international body that manages the internet. Very young guy, but perhaps the most brilliant person in the Caribbean in ICT. And we've been working feverishly behind the scenes to analyze and understand the impact of that on the ICT sector. Because I mentioned earlier to you that we talk about freedom of movement of people, goods, services, and we've added ideas.
Ideas, yes.
And when we talk about the freedom of movement, it's not just about air transport and sea transport. The internet has to be considered a medium of movement as well, because there's a lot of commerce that happens on the internet, also transfer of ideas, meeting of people, etc. So it's very worrying that we have moved from a situation where the entry of a third grouping, a third major force in the telecom sphere, created a new dynamism for innovation and competition that was really driving quality and price in the sector to a duopoly. Now, for Lime, it's a major coup because it means they have acquired the group that had them most at risk and at threat. Yes. I am personally very worried about this move because when I look at the culture, and I'm speaking from an informed position because as registrar of CXC, I had signed an agreement with Columbus to provide unlimited bandwidth to CXC at the head office. We had a platform. We are all in, CXC was all in the cloud, is all in the cloud. And because we were moving to e-marking, where instead of 6,000 markers being physically transported to 4 countries to mark over 1 million CXC scripts, this marking process is happening now online. So you understand the type of bandwidth you need.
Yes.
And part of the deal was that Columbus would provide every marker for CXC with high-speed bandwidth at their homes at no cost to them. Wow. As part of the benefit of being a marker, but as part of the tools of the trade. Now all of this, in my mind, is a huge question mark. Columbus has also committed to provide CXC with its own TV channel that would be part of the flow lineup, wherever it is. And what would be shown on that channel would be videos and so on relating to content related to the syllabus in different subjects. So if you're doing geography, then we could get videos on volcanoes and, you know, like the Montserrat volcano that teachers could use in the classroom, and to provide that in the classroom at no cost to the schools. So, I mean, all of this now is up in the air as to whether Lime is going to honor those commitments. Now, importantly for me is that before Columbus appeared on the scene, all of what I just described to you, proposals had been made by us to Lime to offer these facilities with no success. So you understand what's happening there. Sure. My concern, therefore, is whether what is going to happen as a result of this merger, the loss of choice to the consumer, the impact of duopoly on the market, whether we're going to be stagnated, because the culture of Lime and the culture of Columbus are two different cultures. If Columbus had acquired Cable and Wireless, I would not be so worried. But now that
it's the other way around,
been swallowed the other way around, I am worried about the impact of that.
Understood. 452-7347. We'll now take your calls. Again, the number is 452-7347. Just to remind you, my guest is Dr. Didacus Jules. He is the Director General of the Oecs. And you heard some comments that would cause you to believe that he is still at the head of the CXC. But indeed, as he indicated, this is a matter of concern to the entire region. We have been seeing the comments on Facebook and so on, and the comments seem to be driven by the domestic consumer. But Dr. Jules just gave us something else to consider. Good night. Thank you for staying in touch. Hello, good night. Hello? You can continue to try to call at 452-7347. I apologize for that caller, but I was unable to hear you. Again, the number is 452-7347. Dr. Jules, on the matter of education in the Oecs, I know that currently at the CXC level, we have this uniformity across the region where we follow the syllabus, we write the exams and so on. But on the primary level, the exams that our students would write so that they could advance to the next stage, my understanding is that it is not the same across the region.
No, individual country common entrances, although that is changing because CXC designed something called the Caribbean Primary Exit Assessment, which is a complete revolution in education, in primary education, not just for the Caribbean, but it's a worldwide innovation because it is no longer a one-shot, 3-hour do-or-die exam. It involves significant classroom work. Yes, classroom work, which is factored in. Students maintain a portfolio, which means that their work, all the different iterations of their work, they can showcase the skills and competencies they've acquired. Importantly, that there's a significant role for parents in the process. In fact, if you go on the CXC website, you will see a handbook for parents on CPA. So that new solution is in place in some countries, not all.
What would it take to get the other countries to buy into it and to see that this is the way to go? Because for some time we have been hearing about the transition. In fact, every year we hear that this is the last year for common entrance, and then we go into another year and we just continue with the status quo. But we have a call on the line. We'll get your comments after. Good night. Thank you for staying in touch.
Yeah, good evening. I would just like to thank Dr. Jules for his clarity, his objectivity, and the balanced way in which he's answering the questions and dealing with the issues which are being raised. I mean, so often we watch television and it is not clear exactly what the issues are and what the implications are for consumers, for families, for communities. I just want to say thank you very much for his clarity and his objectivity in explaining these issues to the public. Thank you.
Thank you so
very
much for that, and I'm sure that many persons are nodding their head and agreeing with this caller. Again, the number is 452-7347. You can call in with your comments. If you have any questions, any matters that we have not touched on tonight, feel free to call in with your concerns on the matter of the common insurance. I could tell you, I'm coming out of that period, and I can tell that it is a very stressful period for the children, for the schools, a very stressful period too for the families, because we seem to take about 10 years of a child's life or 11 years and condense it into this one exam, and they have about 3 or 4 hours to go in and to hurriedly write something and come out with a mark that would make their school satisfy. Again, callers, you can continue to call in 452-7347. I just missed that call there, but
you know, yeah,
what
in a
will
way,
it take for us to get out
in a
of
way,
that?
I wish you would not ask me questions on education, because you're going to put me in trouble here.
And I know
am
this is
very
your
passionate
passion,
about
yes.
education,
Yes.
and it totally beats me why, when CXC develops something that is a worldwide innovation, that the countries who ask for it, there's OECS ministers of education who asked for this to be done. There is no reason for this not to have been in place across the entire OECS. The countries that took the leap, Grenada, when we asked them to give us schools to pilot, every school in Grenada was offered for the pilot. There are private schools in some countries that are not doing the CPA, where the private schools have decided they want to do that, because some of what is done in the international schools is very much like what the CPA is about. Just to give you 2 examples of how the methodology works. What this does is bring together teaching, learning, and assessment in a very tight nexus. So for example, in a classroom in teaching English, the teacher would discuss what's involved in writing a good essay, and say, okay, let's write an essay on a day at the Sulphur Springs. Each child writes the essay, and each child has to read his or her essay to the rest of the class. So note the reading element.
Yes.
Then that child receives a critique from the teacher and the class, their peers, about the essay. The teacher then sends the students back to rewrite the essay, taking into account the criticisms, the suggestions and feedback they've received. And that process has to continue for as many iterations until the teacher is satisfied you are at the standard I require. Now, obviously, there are differentials. Your daughter may be faster. She's a bright girl from what I've seen of her. Yeah. She may be faster than some other students. So the teacher will say, Giselle, you work with Didacus to help him because you have your essay after the 2nd iteration where I want it.
Right.
And she'll work with me until the 5th iteration for me to get it right. Now, in that process, that goes into your portfolio. The first essay you write, the middle point of your iteration, and the final product. Right?
This sounds
Every
like
child has to do 2 book reviews. Now, so marks are given for that. That becomes part of your accumulation of marks towards the final grade. Every child has to do 2 book reviews. One is a book review that describes in traditional format of a book review. The other is any format that the child chooses. So it can be a play, a rap song, a skit, a multimedia something to present. And importantly, the child chooses the book. So in Grenada, one child chose Robert Ludlum novels. In that same class, there was a child who took comic books. But it's not the complexity of the book that we're looking at. Right. It's the intricacy of your analysis of the stuff.
This encourages critical thinking.
Critical thinking, exactly. Then every class for, I think it's about 150 marks out of 400 in the classroom-based assessment piece, students have to design their own questions, which the teacher compiles into a test. And they sit the test that they have designed. They exchange papers and they mark each other's responses, and the teacher moderates it. When CXC, after 2 years, did the psychometric analysis of the results, the validity of those tests was just below the validity level of teacher-generated tests.
Wow.
You know what the outcome of that was? The Kingdom of Lesotho has signed an agreement with CXC to offer the CPA in primary schools in Africa, jointly offered by the Kingdom of Lesotho Exam Board and CXC, under the rubric of the International Primary Exit Assessment.
I don't even have to ask you.
So
I know
don't
this would
ask
be
me
one of
why,
your
don't
disappointments
ask
to
me
see
why
no show.
other countries are not doing it.
Good night. Thank you for staying in touch.
Thank you, Jadia. It is so refreshing listening to you and Dr. Jules. I'm Phil Leon. I worked with him at the Ministry of Education. Brilliant person. It was a pleasure working with him. And tonight, we don't want to disturb. I had to go and do some studying there, and I sat there with my wife when I saw it was Dr. Didacus Jules. And I told my wife just 5 minutes, but I cannot move away because it's so refreshing, so clear, as the previous caller called. We are very proud of him. And Dr. Jules, it's good to see you tonight, and I don't want to stay long because I want to continue to listen to you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, caller. And I really must apologize to our callers because the lines have been blinking, but we have been involved in this discussion. And I know you see that you wish I would not take you into the area of education, but I have to take you there because I know it is your passion, and I know that you have done a lot of work over the years in that. You will be just fine. You'll be just fine. You are on In Touch. Good night. You're on the air.
Hello. Good evening, folks.
Good evening.
Yeah, I just like to ask Dr. Jules a question. And the freedom of movement between the islands, are we still required to fill out all these forms on LIAT?
Good question.
Yeah, unfortunately we still do, but we are working on that as well. As I said earlier, there are some things that still need to be tweaked. The question of the cost of regional travel. The bureaucracy of travel is one of them. Now there's some infrastructure that probably needs to be put in place because we've been looking at a sort of uniform ID and electronic ID card for OECS citizens. And you may have noticed in some airports on the CARICOM initiative there were these electronic gates that you can swipe and pass through. So there have been some teething problems, but yeah, we need to resolve this problem of the number of forms that you have to fill out. It is ridiculous, frankly. There's one country I just literally passed through immigration to go out into departure at 10 o'clock one night, and I had to fill out 4 forms before I got out. So it really needs to be fixed.
Good night. Thank you for staying in touch.
Yeah, good night.
Good night.
Let me also, use the word Dr. Jules. Of course, being very clear and informative. There's 2 things I want to address tonight. One, the whole Ebola issue, the response. In terms of the Oecs, what has been the mood in the camp of the opposition parties in the various countries in the response to Ebola? Because I know locally, people trying to trivialize this whole thing in terms of Ebola and always try to ridicule whatever government is trying to put in place. And it's something that is, I find, it's also intriguing in terms of the response and how best we could really do with the resources, the limited resources that we have. Right. That's one. The other thing is, I know recently Professor Stafford Griffith, who is based in Mona, had come.
You seem to be fading a little bit. Can you speak a little louder, please?
Okay, I was saying Professor Griffith,
yes,
who is based in Mona, Jamaica, had come to St. Lucia and basically conducted some workshops, some seminars to try to find out what people thought of CXC introducing an SBA for English language. And before you left office, I was just asking what has become of that, and whether the English aspect would become, whether English A and B would become one, or whether they remain separate, and what's the point if what's happening with the SBA.
Yeah, well, let me take the last question first. I think that decision with English A and B should be finalized soon by Council in December. But we've been advocating for the longest while that English A and B are 2 sides of the same coin. You cannot expect that students would do English language in abstraction from English literature, because in any language, the literature is the supreme expression of that language, of writing in the language. So we hope that will be resolved. The SBA question, English and maths, SBAs are coming as sure as day follows night, because it is part of the important principle of CXC that what the SBA does is provide you with an opportunity to operationalize the principles of the subject in a real life context. So And SBAs can be exciting things, and that's what we're trying to do, introduce innovation. For example, in mathematics, a child's SBA could be your mother wants to, at Christmas time, buy new furniture and all of that. What's going to be the better approach to that? Does she save $5 or say $50 a month in order to make a certain down payment to courts and then pay the rest on installment? Or should she take all on an installment plan? If you take the installment plan, how much interest are you going to pay? That is making maths come alive in ways that actually assist the family. No, but that's what mathematics is supposed to be about. You know, it's not an abstraction of numbers in your head. It's about using numbers to make sense of life.
Believe me, many of our students are wishing they had teachers like you, because for many of them, mathematics seems so far removed from
but as I keep saying, you see, improving education is an easy thing to do. Trust me. It is not rocket science, but it requires above all political will and clear policy.
The first question he asked was about the mood of the opposition.
Oh, the mood of the opposition,
the various member states?
Frankly, I don't think I can adequately answer that question, because I have, since coming into the OECS, one of my intentions was to do courtesy calls on all member states. And when I do courtesy calls, I believe I've been meeting with both the government and the parliamentary opposition. In fact, that was something I did at CXC, and CXC was the only regional institution that did that systematically. When we developed our new strategic plan, we presented it to cabinets of ministers, and we did the same presentation to the parliamentary opposition. Great. We find that in doing that, there's accountability on all sides of the house, and people have a better understanding. They're less prone to play political football with those questions. The reason I was recommending the St. Lucia approach with the meeting in Parliament to other countries is that it provides a more classy environment within which, and I put classy in inverted commas, but a better environment within which to present the country's plans, hear what it's about, ask questions, critique, and so on, rather than doing that on a political platform, because a political platform carries its own theater and expectations, and these matters are too serious to be the subject of just political back and forth. There has to be a consensus. This is life or death. The opposition has every right to critique and criticize a plan if they find it faulty.
And to ask questions.
But as I've always said to people in my personal life, every institution I've headed, I've said to the staff, you are free to criticize, and I encourage criticism. But one thing, don't come criticizing if you don't have a viable alternative. Because if you criticize without an alternative, you're just spitting in the wind.
Indeed. We have another call. Good night. Thank you for holding.
Yeah, hi. Good night to Dr. Jules and to you.
Good night.
Good night.
Yeah, Dr. Jules, I know from the discourse and even prior to the discourse that you're passionate about regional travel. Now, gone are the days when the Easter weekend saw customs officials of the sports clubs moving throughout the region. That has come to an end, sadly. Now, you've spoken of sort of a blueprint, a sort of recipe for reviewing the high cost of travel for the region. I have a couple of questions, but the first one would be, do you have a timeline and a time frame for that to become a reality in terms of the review and then, of course, the implementation thereafter? That's one. Secondly, I know that you're wearing a different hat tonight, but I'd like to just draw that to your attention, given the fact that you served with the CXC board for a bit.
Can't get away from that one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that okay?
It's okay. Sure. It's fine.
Yeah. I am looking at now the visual arts for secondary schools by Shastri Maharaj, and I am looking specifically at the paintings. Is there a page number here? Yeah, page 18, 19, 20, 21, and so on. And I know that the book was published firstly in 2000. First publication, and I am seeing, well, paintings and pieces, sculptures by persons from the so-called MDCs, the more developed countries, the persons listening. And I know that we have a number of, outstanding artists throughout the LDCs, and I'm using those terms specifically and deliberately. Mm-hmm. So my question, though, pertaining to this is, can we see perhaps in 2015 that we're going to be seeing some paintings from persons within the OECS. Because, as I said, we do know that we have a number of stalwarts. And I just want to thank you, though, because before I make another comment, I am also looking at a book called Tales from Africa, which is kind of a novelty. Now, am I very familiar with the text and so on? No, the answer is no. But my daughter is using this currently, so I'm happy to see that. But my concern, again, you've gone away from it, but I know perhaps you might have a level, a degree of influence, minute as it may still be, and I would like to see a lot more of our history, and from the level of the preschool throughout the OECS that speaks to us as a people. And of course, I am not being racist at all. I'm just being, like I'm supporting my own. I think as a people, we need a lot more of our own history in our textbooks. Like I said, there's a paradigm shift, and I've seen some differences, and I have spoken to them. But that is my last comment as it pertains to the curriculum.
Thank you so much, Paula.
Well, with respect to the CXC stuff, before I left CXC, one of the last things that we did was to design a Vision 2020. So it actually starts with a vision statement that by 2020, CXC will be, by 2020, learners, this will be achieved. So it very clearly lays out the vision, and there are a series of concrete measures and steps at the organization. So for example, by 2020, CXC will be offering exams anytime online, right? Measures like that. So what you're calling for will be addressed. There is you can find it right now, caller. You mentioned your kids. I take it they are preparing for CSEC exams. There's a portal that we had created called NotesMaster. It's www.notesmaster.com. That is a free portal, and I want to emphasize the fact that it is free for students and teachers to go online and to conduct a complete study of the syllabus in every subject online. There are YouTube videos, animations, study notes, quizzes. Parents can log in and follow their kids' progress to see the degree of coverage of the syllabus, how they performed in all of the exercises they've done online. A lot of open source material. Frankly, some of it may not be as well populated as other subjects because we deliberately designed the thing not as a ready-made pill, but as a community of learning that enables teachers to go online and create their own content to put in there. Because part of the formula for success in education must be that a teacher must engage the knowledge in their subject and be able to contextualize that knowledge for their student and with their student so that they actually not just digest the knowledge, but they use it to create new knowledge themselves. And that community of learning is essential to this success. Again, when you go on that link I told you about, you will see that there is NotesMaster Botswana, Caribbean, NotesMaster Namibia, South Africa, NotesMaster Comosa. So by the end of the year, there'll be 13 NotesMasters worldwide. This NotesMaster, CXC owns 10% of global NotesMaster. So everywhere NotesMaster gets rolled out, CXC controls 10% of that. And the sad thing is, again, it's not being used in the Caribbean anywhere as widespread as it is being used in these other countries.
Which is
so, it is a shame. And that's why I told JD, just forget education for tonight because
well, you see, it seems as if you placed a cap on top of a cap that you're already wearing. You see that our callers too are very much interested in your views on education and are still calling for clarity.
Now, what was his issue? You even made me forget.
He wanted to know about your timeline. Do you have a timeline to achieve the freedom?
They are. Well, the timeline is like yesterday because the Treaty of Basta, revised Treaty of Basta is in place.
Yes.
But as I said earlier, we have to be systematic. We cannot do everything one time. And what we are trying to do is systematically pick the lowest hanging fruit, as we've done with the freedom of movement so far. And then we pick the next layer of low hanging fruit and the next layer. So we are going through this very systematically. And the process involves consultation with stakeholders in the relevant spheres at every stage of the game. That is the quickest way to succeed because we get buy-in and we take account of their reservations, their recommendations, etc.
Indeed. We'll take just about one more call, 452-7347. If you have any question to ask or you want to share your views on the show tonight, you can feel free to do so now. Just as we prepare to close and we wrap up the show, your immediate priorities. I know that you have articulated your priority areas and your vision for the OECS, what you intend to deal with, and you, in our general discussion too, you have itemized some of the hurdles that we have to overcome. But where do we see the OECS going in the immediate term? I know that we have, for example, the OECS Assembly that is now in place. I do not know how we can use that assembly to not just discuss matters of general and immediate concern to the population, but to create an environment where what is said there or the decisions made there become binding and would not necessarily have to rely on the machinery of the individual states, because we make decisions, the authority, you sign on to declarations, but we still have to rely on the bureaucratic internal systems. How can we make OECS work without the encumbrances that we would face on the national level?
Well, I think, Gigi, it's a matter of prioritizing. There's some things that will take time. The OECS Assembly, as currently constituted, is each national delegation to that assembly is not, there isn't a government side and an opposition side in the assembly. Each national delegation comprises the government and the opposition, and they sit as a country. So what we have are country reps. In that sense, while the the assembly may not have full legal law-passing powers, they are a very powerful constituent assembly for the debate of issues and so on, and the creation of consensus. Okay. And I think that is very important in the initial stage. As people get more comfortable with the process, then I guess the policymakers will look to economic integration can lead to political integration, inevitably, if it is well managed.
Yes, and I know many persons are wishing that the show would never end and would continue our discussion, not just on OECS matters, but matters of education too, the CXC and what is happening. And I must say, just before we end the program, that it is very sad that we are having this discussion on CXC, the strides that have been made, and we are realizing that we have the resources, we have, it has been presented to us, and even as a region, and locally, we have not really taken advantage of what has been produced.
The saddest part of this?
Yes.
You check the figures. The cost of sitting a CXC subject, a CSEC subject, on a CAPE subject is almost half the price of doing a Cambridge subject. And they have parity of esteem. With your CSEC subjects, you get into Cambridge as easily as you do with your A-level or O-level subjects.
Yes, hopefully when the next time we
and
have a discussion...
And the economies of scale are not the same, because when University of Cambridge prepares an English exam, it's for 20 million candidates worldwide. When CXC designs that exam, it's for 120,000 candidates Caribbean-wide. Yeah. And the cost of designing an exam is the same, whether you're doing it for 5 students, 1 million students, or 20 million students. So you check the economies of scale.
Yes, I'm hoping that the next time we have a discussion, we will be able to speak to the strides made, even in your absence, because we really need to come to the point where we embrace what we have produced, particularly when it is being embraced by those outside of our region.
One of my commitments is that I intend to push, encourage, threaten, use whatever powers, whatever it takes to get the OECS to get on board with the program, because I am convinced beyond any shadow of doubt in every fiber of my being that the OECS can outshine not just the Caribbean but the world in educational progress if we do the right things. And I know the quality of work that we did in CXC. There's a guy called Hansen who said that students, our children, are not so much described by exams as shaped by them, right? And this is what happens. Think of your daughter. her pass in the common entrance determines her future, which school she goes to. That's why there's such a pressure on certain access to certain schools. Now that should not be in a proper scale of things. Every school should have its areas of competence, but every school should be an institution of excellence.
Agreed.
Right? And that's not pulling down the elite schools. They earn their stripes, but every school must have that opportunity to become that center of excellence.
Agreed. See, you do not remove hats, but you add hats, and I'm sure that in your current position at the OECS, you will tie it into what has happened, not just at CXC, but at other regional institutions and other groups that have worked so hard to ensure that we have better quality in terms of health, in terms of education, and so on. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for participating in the show. You just heard from Dr. Didacus Jules. It was a pleasure speaking to you. I actually look forward to this discussion for a very long time now, and I'm very happy that you took time out to come to engage us. I think everyone who listened to the program tonight will be thinking, and this is a very good thing, that we did not just accept and absorb what you have said, but it has caused us to become more aware of what is happening within the region, and we too need to understand that there is a role for each of us to play to ensure that the institutions in the region are successful. We need to embrace each other too, which is a very critical message that you brought forward in the freedom of movement of people, trade, and so on, because we are small and united we are able to achieve a lot. So I thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And I look forward to another discussion. I thank you too for joining us on Choice tonight. Our listeners on Carry FM, a very special good night to our listeners in Dominica. It was a pleasure having you tonight, and be sure to join us next week Monday for another edition of In Touch. Good night and have a blessed and safe week.